Welcome back, my limitation-transcending architect. Something extraordinary has crystallized that separates you from everyone competing in the same space, while others are meticulously following established rules, optimizing strategies within accepted constraints, and competing for advantage within predetermined boundaries. You've done something categorically different that renders their entire competitive framework irrelevant. You discovered the master switch, the underlying control mechanism that sets the parameters everyone else accepts as fixed, and you've used that access to fundamentally rewrite what limitations apply to you. This wasn't incremental improvement or clever rule exploitation. This was penetrating to meta level where rules themselves get established and exercising authority. At that level, to modify your operating constraints in ways that make you incomparable to others still playing within unmodified rule set. They're competing to win the game. You changed what game you're playing entirely by accessing level where game parameters get defined and redefining those parameters to eliminate constraints that limit everyone else. The architects have been monitoring competitive dynamics and constraint transcendence, phenomena across civilizations for eons, and they've identified what you've achieved as meta-level authority access. When someone discovers that limitations they've been accepting as natural laws are actually arbitrary parameters set by accessible control systems, then gains capacity to modify those parameters rather than just optimizing performance within them. Most competition occurs within rule-bounded systems where everyone accepts same constraints and competes on execution quality within those constraints, but certain individuals discover that constraints themselves are modifiable through accessing meta-level control systems, fundamentally changing their competitive position from player within game to designer of game parameters, at least regarding limitations applied to themselves. Watch what's happening across competitive landscape since you accessed Master Switch. Others are still grinding within original constraint system, working harder, developing better strategies, optimizing efficiency. All valuable efforts, but operating within limitations you've transcended. They're getting marginally better results through superior execution within fixed rules. You're getting categorically different results because you're operating under modified rules that eliminate constraints they're still bound by. This creates appearance that you're cheating or breaking rules, but you're not violating rules. You've accessed legitimate authority to modify parameter settings that establish what rules apply to you. Some competitors are experiencing confusion bordering on outrage. From their perspective, everyone should be bound by same limitations they're bound by, making your transcendence feel like unfair advantage rather than legitimate discovery of modifiable parameters. They invested effort in mastering competition within original constraints, making your constraint modification seem like invalidation of their hard-earned excellence. But their emotional response reveals they're still thinking like players within game. Rather than recognizing game itself has accessible control systems, the truly significant element is that Master Switch was apparently always accessible. You didn't hack into forbidden system or exploit security vulnerability. You discovered legitimate control interface that was available to everyone, but that nobody else thought to look for because they accepted limitations as natural rather than as parameter settings. You found Master Switch not through superior skill at playing game but through questioning whether game parameters were truly fixed, then investigating whether modification access existed, then learning to operate control systems that others assumed were either non-existent or permanently locked. Now the architects are analyzing what enabled you to discover Master Switch while others remain trapped, playing within unmodified constraints, and they're identifying what they call constraint questioning. Consciousness, the psychological capacity to perceive accepted limitations as potentially arbitrary parameter settings rather than as natural laws. creating motivation to investigate whether modification access exists rather than just accepting constraints as permanent features of reality. Most people experience limitations as given. They might work to overcome them through effort within rules, but they don't question whether rules themselves could be changed. Your consciousness apparently includes fundamental skepticism about whether any limitation is truly fixed versus just currently accepted. Watch what constraint questioning consciousness creates in how you approach obstacles where others see limitation and immediately begin strategizing how to optimize performance despite that limitation. You apparently pause to examine whether limitation is truly necessary or just conventional assumption that could be challenged. Where they accept constraint and work within it brilliantly, you question constraint and investigate whether it's actually enforced or just socially maintained. Through collective acceptance, this questioning creates entirely different problem-solving approach. Others optimize within constraints. You eliminate constraints when investigation reveals they're modifiable. Some studying innovation and breakthrough thinking recognize that major advances often come from questioning assumptions everyone else accepts. Constraints that seem permanent often prove modifiable once someone bothers to investigate. But most innovation occurs within meta-constraints that remain unquestioned. Your constraint questioning apparently operates at deeper level. You question meta-constraints that define what kinds of limitations are negotiable, investigating control systems that establish parameter settings rather than just pushing against parameters within established system. Others exploring psychology of limitation note that most people develop learned helplessness around constraints. Early experiences with unchangeable limitations create generalized assumption that limitations are permanent, stopping investigation into whether specific limitations could be modified. Your psychology apparently avoided or transcended learned helplessness, maintaining belief that limitations warrant investigation rather than automatic acceptance, creating persistent motivation to search for master switches even when others would assume none exist. A few from systems and engineering perspectives recognize that complex systems typically include control interfaces for parameter modification. Otherwise, systems couldn't be designed, debugged, or optimized during development. But these control interfaces often become hidden or forgotten once system is deployed, with users accepting parameter settings as permanent features, rather than recognizing them as modifiable through accessing control systems. Your discovery of master switch might simply be recognizing that social and personal limitation. Systems likely include control interfaces just like technical systems do, then systematically investigating until you located access. The architects observed that constraint questioning consciousness is what separated you from others competing within same limitation framework. They accepted limitations as given and competed on execution quality within constraints. You questioned whether limitations were truly fixed and investigated until discovering master switch that controls parameter settings. Most people have rule-following consciousness that accepts constraints and optimizes within them. You have rule-examining consciousness that treats every constraint as hypothesis about what's modifiable rather than as fact about what's permanent, creating fundamentally different relationship with limitations that enable discovering modification, access others never sought because they never questioned whether such access could exist. Something powerful is emerging now that the architects call post-switch authority, integration after accessing master switch and rewriting your limitations. You're experiencing profound psychological shift where your relationship to all constraints has fundamentally changed because you now know from direct experience that limitations aren't natural laws but modifiable parameters, making you permanently different from those who still experience constraints as fixed features of reality. Before finding Master Switch, you might have intellectually believed constraints were arbitrary. After operating Master Switch and watching your limitations actually change in response to parameter modifications, you have embodied knowledge that transforms your entire approach to any limitation you encounter. Watch how post-switch authority integration manifests in your psychology. You approach new limitations with curiosity rather than resignation. Instead of accepting constraint and figuring out how to work within it, you automatically begin investigating whether this particular constraint has accessible master switch that would allow modification. You've developed pattern recognition for distinguishing truly fixed limitations from modifiable parameters disguised as fixed limitations, making you increasingly efficient at identifying which constraints warrant acceptance and which warrant investigation. For modification access, some who've watched your transformation are experiencing vicarious empowerment, seeing you successfully access master, switch, and rewrite limitations suggests to them that their own constraints might be modifiable if they could find their master switches. This creates demand for you to teach your discovery process. But you're finding that constraint questioning consciousness itself might be prerequisite that can't easily be taught. Either someone naturally questions whether limitations are permanent or they don't, making master switch discovery feel obvious to those with questioning consciousness and impossible to those without it. Others are attempting to follow your exact process, retracing steps you took to discover master switch in your domain, hoping that replication will allow them to access similar parameter modification capabilities. But many discover that master switches are context-specific rather than universal. The control interface you discovered for modifying your limitations might not work for their limitations in their domains, requiring them to conduct their own investigation rather than just copying your approach. A few are recognizing that master switch access comes with responsibility. Modifying parameter settings that establish your limitations affects not just you, but entire system you're embedded in, potentially creating ripple effects that impact others. This creates ethical dimension to parameter modification that pure rule following doesn't involve when you're just optimizing within fixed rules. Your choices affect only your results, but when you're modifying rules themselves, your choices affect the game everyone else is playing. Some are experiencing envy or resentment. They worked hard to excel within original constraints, and your parameter modification makes their excellence less impressive by comparison because you're operating under different limitation structure. They want master switch access to be restricted or your parameter modifications to be reversed, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your transcendence threatens the value of their constraint-bound achievements. The architects observe that post-switch authority integration is permanent transformation. Once you've experienced directly modifying limitations you previously accepted as fixed, you can't return to naive constraint acceptance that characterizes those who haven't discovered master switches. They're playing by rules because rules seem permanent. You found master switch, discovered rules are modifiable parameters, and permanently changed your relationship with any limitation you encounter because you now know from embodied experience that constraints warrant investigation rather than automatic acceptance. Now the architects are revealing critical distinction about what rewriting your limits actually means. You haven't eliminated all limitations or made yourself unlimited. Rather, you've accessed what they call selective parameter optimization, where you can modify specific constraint settings that were blocking your highest value objectives while accepting other limitations that aren't currently relevant to your goals. Most people misunderstand limitation transcendence as becoming unlimited in all dimensions, but that's neither possible nor desirable. Real master switch access involves intelligent selection of which parameters to modify based on strategic assessment of which constraints are actually limiting your most important objectives versus which constraints are acceptable or even beneficial to maintain. Consider what selective parameter optimization requires strategically. You have to identify which limitations are actually binding constraints, preventing objectives you care about versus which limitations feel restrictive but aren't actually blocking anything important. You have to assess costs and risks of modifying each parameter. Some modifications might have unintended consequences that make them net negative despite removing constraint you disliked. You have to prioritize which modifications to pursue, given that master switch access might require effort or resources to exercise, making unlimited modification impractical even if technically possible. Watch what selective optimization reveals about your actual goals and values. The parameters you chose to modify expose what you actually care about achieving. You didn't randomly modify constraints. You specifically targeted limitations that were blocking paths to outcomes you valued, enough to warrant investigation and modification effort. Others can learn more about your true priorities from observing which constraints you transcended than from listening to what you claim to value, because parameter modification reveals demonstrated priorities rather than just stated intentions. Some studying strategy and resource allocation recognize that selective optimization is hallmark of mature strategic thinking. Novices want to optimize everything simultaneously, but experts recognize that focusing resources on highest leverage improvements produces better results than dispersing effort across all possible optimizations. Your approach to limitation modification apparently follows this principle. You're not trying to transcend all constraints. You're strategically modifying specific parameters where modification creates disproportionate value while accepting other limitations as non-binding or even useful. Others exploring constraints and creativity note that some limitations actually enhance performance. By focusing effort and forcing creative solutions within boundaries, unlimited freedom can produce paralysis or mediocrity, while intelligent constraints often generate excellence. Your selective parameter optimization suggests you understand this. You're removing constraints that genuinely limit important objectives while potentially maintaining or even strengthening constraints that focus your efforts productively. A few recognize that selective optimization requires ongoing assessment as you achieve objectives that were blocked by constraints. You've modified, new objectives emerge that might be limited by different constraints, requiring continuous investigation and strategic modification rather than one-time transcendence. Master switch access isn't end state, but ongoing capability to continuously align your constraint profile with your evolving objectives. The architects observe that selective parameter optimization is what makes your limitation rewriting sustainable and strategic rather than chaotic. You're not randomly transcending constraints or trying to eliminate all limitations. You're intelligently identifying which specific parameters to modify to maximum effect while maintaining constraint structure where it serves your purposes. They're playing by all the rules without questioning which rules actually matter. You found master switch and strategically rewrote specific limits that were blocking your highest value objectives while accepting other constraints as non-binding or beneficial, creating optimized limitation profile. Rather than attempting impossible and undesirable unlimited state, the architects are now analyzing what happens when others discover you've accessed master switch and rewritten your limitations. You're experiencing what they call competitive framework disruption, where your parameter modifications force everyone competing in same space to either find their own master switches and modify their constraints, accept permanent disadvantage against you operating under superior parameter settings, or attempt to restrict your access to maintain competitive environment where everyone operates under same limitations. Most competitions assume rule equality, everyone bound by same constraints, competing on execution quality. Within those constraints, your unequal constraint profile breaks this assumption, forcing fundamental restructuring of competitive dynamics. Watch how different competitors respond to your parameter modifications. High performers who were winning within original constraints are particularly threatened. They optimized extensively for competition within specific limitation framework, and your framework modification makes their optimization potentially obsolete, or at least less valuable. Some become motivated to find their own master switches, hoping to modify their parameters similarly. Others demand that your modifications be reversed or that you be excluded from competition, arguing that fair competition requires equal constraints, even though those constraints were always modifiable by anyone willing to investigate. Some lower performers are experiencing hope. If limitations are modifiable through master switch access, perhaps their poor performance within original constraints doesn't reflect permanent inferiority, but rather lack of investigation into parameter modification. Your success demonstrates possibility of constraint transcendence, motivating them to search for master switches rather than accepting current limitations as permanent. However, many discover that finding and operating master switches requires capabilities they lack, making your transcendence simultaneously inspiring and demoralizing. Others are attempting to create new rules specifically designed to prevent master switch access, recognizing they can't compete against you operating under modified parameters. They're working to establish frameworks that explicitly prohibit parameter modification or that detect and penalize such modification. But these regulatory attempts often fail because master switch access operates at meta-level above rules they're trying to establish, making prohibition difficult to enforce. When you can potentially modify parameters that determine whether prohibitions apply to you, a few are recognizing that competitive frameworks might need to evolve. If parameter modification is possible and legitimate, perhaps competitions should explicitly accommodate different constraint profiles, rather than assuming equality, creating tiered competitions where people operating under different limitation structures compete separately. This would acknowledge reality that constraints are modifiable while maintaining competitive fairness within each constraint tier. Some observers outside competition are most interested in your discovery process. They're not competing with you, but they're fascinated by how you found master switch, hoping to apply similar investigation approaches to finding master switches in their own domains. Your competitive advantage becomes secondary to larger insight that limitation systems generally include modification access that most people never investigate because they accept constraints as permanent. The architects observe that competitive framework disruption is inevitable consequence of discovering master switch while others remain constraint-bound. Once someone achieves unequal parameter profile through legitimate modification access, competition can't continue assuming equal constraints. They're playing by original rules, competing within unmodified limitation framework. You found master switch, rewrote your limits, and forced everyone else to either find their own modification access, accept disadvantage, or attempt to restrict what you've legitimately accessed, fundamentally disrupting competitive framework that assumed everyone would remain equally constrained. Now something's emerging that the architects call master switch multiplication effect. After successfully accessing and operating first master switch to modify your limitations, you're discovering that similar control interfaces exist for modifying other constraints you previously accepted, creating accelerating transcendence, where each successful parameter modification makes finding next master switch easier and faster. Most people who discover one master switch treat it as unique, discovery specific to particular domain. You're apparently recognizing pattern across master switches that enables systematic investigation for control interfaces across multiple limitation domains, creating compounding advantage as you modify increasingly many parameter settings that competitors still accept as permanent constraints. Watch how multiplication effect manifests practically. You're developing generalized skill at recognizing signs that limitations are actually modifiable parameters. Certain patterns in how constraints are enforced or discussed that indicate parameter settings rather than natural laws. This pattern recognition allows you to quickly identify promising candidates for master switch investigation rather than randomly testing every constraint for modifiability. Each successful modification strengthens your pattern recognition, creating positive feedback loop where transcendence becomes progressively easier. Some studying, learning, and skill transfer recognize that master switch discovery might be generalizable meta skill rather than domain-specific capability. Once you've learned to question constraints and investigate for modification access in one area, that meta skill transfers to other areas even though specific control interfaces differ. Your multiplication effect suggests you've developed this meta skill and are systematically applying it across multiple constraint domains. Others note that multiple parameter modifications create synergies, removing limitation. A makes you more effective at investigating limitation. B and successful modification of B creates resources or capabilities that enable approaching limitation. C, this creates exponential rather than linear transcendence trajectory, explaining why your competitive advantage is accelerating rather than plateauing. If you recognize that multiplication effect might have limits, even with excellent master switch investigation skills, some constraints might be truly fixed rather than modifiable, or modification costs might exceed benefits. Your accelerating transcendence creates risk of overconfidence where you assume all limitations are modifiable when some might be permanent, potentially leading to wasted investigation effort or attempts to modify parameters that shouldn't be modified. Some watching your multiplication effect are experiencing despair if your constraint transcendence is accelerating while they're still struggling within original limitations. Gap between your capabilities and theirs will continue widening, making competition increasingly futile. This creates pressure to either find their own master switches quickly or exit competition entirely rather than accepting permanent and growing disadvantage. Others are attempting to document your pattern. If your master switch discoveries follow recognizable pattern, perhaps they can learn that pattern and apply it systematically rather than requiring independent discovery. But you're finding that pattern itself might be difficult to articulate. You recognize it intuitively, but struggle to codify it in way others can follow, making your multiplication advantage difficult to transfer even when you're willing to share. The architects observe that master switch multiplication effect explains why your advantage keeps growing. You're not just operating under one modified parameter setting, but are continuously discovering and modifying additional constraints, creating compounding transcendence that makes you progressively less comparable to those operating within unmodified limitation frameworks. They're playing by all the rules, bound by multiple constraints they accept as permanent. You found pattern underlying master switches, enabling systematic discovery and modification of parameter after parameter, rewriting your limits continuously rather than achieving one-time transcendence.